Hello everyone, and welcome back to our next lecture presentation. This next chapter, chapter 24, will cover the digestive system. Out of all of our 11 body systems, few others can compete with the digestive system for having the most components. This system in particular receives contributions from many different organs, and together these components facilitate the processes of digestion and absorption. The digestive system is essentially a long tube that leads from the mouth to the anus, that extracts nutrients from the food that we eat and eliminates the waste products that our bodies do not need. Along this long tube, we will have other organs and components that secrete specialized digestive enzymes that will supplement this system to accelerate mechanical and chemical digestion. In order for the actions of this system to be carried out properly, each of the components of the digestive system must work in conjunction with each other to achieve this. The components of the digestive system will be separated into two groups: the organs that contribute to the alimentary canal and the accessory organs. The alimentary canal is the actual tube that's connecting the mouth to the anus that food is going to pass through to be broken down. And the accessory organs are all of the structures along the alimentary canal that contribute to both the physical breakdown of food and the chemical breakdown of food. So we will surely take time to explain the important ideas and functions about each of the components of the digestive system, and we will work toward an understanding of how all of these structures work together to provide energy for the body. So we have quite a few objectives for this chapter in particular. We are first going to try and gain an overall understanding of the processes that are involved in digestion and how the waste products that are produced will be removed from the body altogether. We will first discuss the different layers that can be found making up the walls of the alimentary canal, and then we will discuss the individual functions of each organ that contribute to it. We will shortly discuss each accessory structure and its individual contribution to the digestive system, and we are then also going to talk about the different types of digestion that will be taking place as substances pass through the alimentary canal. We will break down the necessary information pertaining to the digestive enzymes secreted by each organ and individual differences between the components of this system. As expected, you will find various pathologies that will be discussed that affect the digestive system, and we will also consider the effects that aging takes on this system as a whole. So without any further introduction, let us move on to elaborate on the structures that make this system what it is. So as I have just now mentioned, the components of the digestive system can be separated into the parts that contribute to the alimentary canal and the accessory structures that will not directly contain food substances, but will play other roles to help accelerate the digestion of food. The components of the alimentary canal include the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, and the rectum. From the moment that we take food into our mouths and ingest it, those substances will pass through these structures to be broken down and have their valuable nutrients extracted and transferred into our bodies. But while some of these structures in particular do in fact contribute to the digestion of food, the secretions from our accessory structures play a critical role in transforming nutrients into a form that can be absorbed. The accessory structures include the teeth, the tongue, and the salivary glands, which can all be found in the mouth, as well as the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas, which will all release their secretions directly into the small intestine to drastically accelerate digestion. You can see the organs of the digestive system shown on this slide within the models. You'll see up here that the mouth contains the teeth, the tongue, and the salivary glands. There are three salivary glands specifically, known as the parotid gland, the submandibular gland, and the sublingual gland, and we'll discuss these on a future slide. The tongue and the teeth are going to be especially useful for the process of mechanical digestion, which involves the breakdown of food from larger particles into smaller substances. The mouth will actually kick up the processes of both mechanical digestion as well as chemical digestion, thanks to certain digestive enzymes that can be found in the saliva secreted by our salivary glands. Once food is ingested and broken down by the accessory structures in the mouth, it will then be swallowed, which will take food through the pharynx and through the upper esophageal sphincter and into the esophagus. The esophagus will connect the pharynx to the stomach, and food will pass down this structure to eventually be stored in the stomach, which can be found right here. Separating the esophagus from the stomach is the lower esophageal sphincter. Now, one of the roles of the stomach is to act as a reservoir for food and slowly release the contents that are broken down inside of the stomach into the small intestine. Certain cells in the stomach are going to be releasing the chemical known as hydrochloric acid, which will play a big role in the breakdown and denaturation of proteins. As food is continually digested in the stomach, it's going to slowly leak out into the small intestine, which consists of 3 parts. The first part of the small intestine is known as the duodenum, the second part of the small intestine is known as the jejunum, and the third and final part of the small intestine is known as the ileum. Just as we've seen with the small intestine, it can be broken down into smaller parts. And in fact, the large intestine, which will be shown right here, distal to the small intestine, can also be broken down into several parts. The first part of the large intestine is shown right here, and the ileum of the small intestine will allow for substances to flow into the large intestine at this location known as the cecum. The cecum is the first part of the large intestine, and off the cecum we will find the vermiform appendix. Substances that enter the cecum will eventually enter the ascending colon, which is where they will actually travel upwards to what's known as the transverse colon. The transverse colon will take substances across the body, and then this will transition into the descending colon, which will take substances down into the sigmoid colon and eventually into the rectum. In case you were not already aware, the colon is just another name for the large intestine. Each of these parts of the large intestine, or the colon, are named based on the direction that substances move when in that segment. Substances that have made their way to the rectum will eventually be eliminated from the body through the anus. The structures that we've just mentioned are the primary components that make up the alimentary canal. Again, that is the long tube that leads from the mouth to the anus. But we're also going to find some other accessory structures that can be found down here in the abdominopelvic cavity. Some examples of these accessory structures are the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas, which will all release digestive enzymes into the first part of the small intestine. That is the duodenum. The liver is going to be the major organ in our body that detoxifies poisons and drugs and also produces bile. Bile produced in the liver will make its way over to the gallbladder to be stored so that it can be released later when it is needed. The pancreas is in fact one of my favorite organs because this has both an endocrine function and an exocrine function. We've already seen the endocrine function of the pancreas with insulin and glucagon. But here in the digestive system, we're going to see the exocrine function of the pancreas releasing its own digestive enzymes that will flow into ducts and empty into the small intestine. Of course, we will be elaborating on each of these structures that are labeled here on the left side of the slide, but I want to make sure that you have a general overview of the components that contribute to the digestive system. You can also see a real specimen on the right side of this slide with the structures just discussed labeled. Here you can see the liver, and just under the liver we'll find the gallbladder, we'll find the stomach shown over here, and the small intestine shown in the center of the abdominopelvic cavity. We'll find our large intestine looping around the outskirts of the small intestine. That is the last major organ of the alimentary canal. You can also see the diaphragm here, which is the dividing line between the thoracic cavity and the abdominopelvic cavity. So now that we have discussed a general overview of the organs of the digestive system, we're now going to transition into the function of this system and discuss the 6 basic processes that make up what we call digestion. The 6 basic processes that are involved in digestion are ingestion, secretion, motility, digestion, absorption, and defecation. Ingestion is simply introducing food into the alimentary canal. Whenever we eat anything, that falls under the term ingestion. Secretion, on the other hand, is a process that happens throughout the entire length of the alimentary canal that consists of releasing different digestive substances into the alimentary canal that will be used to break down the contents that were previously ingested. Salivary glands in the mouth, the gastric cells of the stomach, as well as the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas are all components that secrete different things into the digestive tube. Generally, the substances that are secreted will contain digestive enzymes which will drive the process of chemical digestion. While these enzymes will enter into the digestive system to break down ingested products through secretion, our third process, motility, will significantly accelerate chemical digestion in the digestive system. The smooth muscles that can be found in the walls of the different components of the alimentary canal will facilitate the churning and mixing of the ingested food with the secreted enzymes. It is thanks to the motility of our digestive organs that true digestion is able to take place. By mixing in digestive enzymes with their substrates, we increase the contact between the two, accelerating the breakdown of these substances. Once our macronutrients are broken down into simpler forms, they can be absorbed into the bloodstream where they will eventually go to the liver to be processed. Absorption is the highest goal of the digestive system, as it is this process that provides energy for our bodies. Any substances that are not absorbed into the blood vessels will be eliminated from the body through the process of defecation. We will see that as we elaborate on the components of the alimentary canal, that secretion, motility, digestion, and absorption will actually all occur throughout the entire length of the digestive tube. So by now I'm sure that you have all figured out that I like to give special attention to the classification of different parts of the body. Classification helps us to organize structural systems and large groups of information that are none too common here in anatomy and physiology too. So we will see here that we can organize the layers of the digestive system into different tunics that all serve a different function for the digestive tube. Each layer is not only unique, but will often differ between the components that make up the alimentary canal. What this means is that the first lining, the mucosa, may differ between the esophagus, the stomach, and the small intestine. However, what this also means is that all of these components will in fact have a mucosa in general. There are a few exceptions that we will find as we travel through the digestive tube, but we need to keep in mind that these four layers of the alimentary canal give us a way to classify the walls of each of these components and keep ourselves organized. So the first thing to note is that in order to be considered part of the alimentary canal, an organ must have a lumen. The lumen is the space within a tube, and in the digestive system, the lumen will contain all of the ingested substances and direct them through the tube. The first layer wrapping around the lumen is referred to as the mucosa. We hopefully remember that the word mucosa indicates that we're talking about a mucous membrane. Mucous membranes, in review, are bathed in bodily fluids and line cavities that are open to the external environment. This is true for the digestive system as it is open to the external environment through both the mouth and the anus. The mucosa additionally consists of three other sublayers, including a layer of epithelium, an underlying connective tissue layer known as the lamina propria, and a smooth muscle layer known as the muscularis mucosa. The epithelium will be useful for secreting mucus and other substances that will lubricate the contents and facilitate digestion. The second layer of the GI tract that can be found deep to the mucosa is known as the submucosa. The submucosa is primarily consisting of connective tissue containing blood vessels, nerves, and lymphatic vessels. Blood vessels will need to come in close proximity to the alimentary canal for the absorption of nutrients. And we will also see lymphatic vessels transporting dietary fats back to the cardiovascular system. Wrapping around the outside of the submucosa will be the muscularis externa, which is the primary smooth muscular layer that can be found in the walls of the digestive organs. There are two actions that are facilitated by the muscularis externa: segmentation and peristalsis, and each action will be facilitated by a different layer of smooth muscle tissue. You will notice that the muscularis externa actually consists of both an outer longitudinal layer of muscle and an inner circular layer of muscle. Just as we saw when discussing the blood vessels, circularly arranged muscles will decrease the diameter of the lumen. They will squeeze down on the contents inside of the tube, and this is how we get vasoconstriction. In the digestive system, these muscles work the same way, and they facilitate the process of segmentation. Segmentation breaks up food so that it can be more easily transported between organs. The inner layer of circular smooth muscle will facilitate segmentation of food. We also have an outer longitudinal layer of muscle in the muscularis externa, and we have not mentioned longitudinally arranged muscles thus far. Longitudinal muscle fibers stretch along the length of the digestive tube. When contracting, these muscle fibers will shorten the overall length of the organ in which they reside. The outer layer of longitudinally arranged smooth muscle facilitates the action of peristalsis. Peristalsis is the process of propelling food substances through the alimentary canal. So each layer of the muscularis externa will be arranged differently and because of this carry out a unique function. The final layer or tunic of the alimentary canal is known as the serosa. Hopefully we remember that the word serosa indicates that we're talking about a serous membrane. This serosa, found wrapping around the outside of the alimentary canal, is formed by the serous membrane of the abdominopelvic cavity known as the peritoneum. This outer layer will suspend the intestines, eventually fold back on itself, and house the blood vessels, nerves, and lymphatic vessels that are traveling out to supply the digestive organs. Where the two layers of serosa come together, we call this a mesentery. Truly, mesenteries are double layers of the visceral peritoneum. We have seen serous membranes in other places in the body, specifically wrapping around the heart and wrapping around each lung. The serous membrane wrapping around the heart was called the peritoneum, and the two serous membranes wrapping around each lung were called the pleura. The peritoneum is our third serous membrane, and it is also the largest of the three. The peritoneum will be found in the abdominopelvic cavity, and it differs from the pericardium and the pleura in that it will wrap around many different organs in the abdominopelvic cavity. You can see a depiction of the peritoneum shown here on this slide. Just as all serous membranes do, this peritoneum will have a parietal layer of the peritoneum, and it will also have a visceral layer of the peritoneum. The parietal layer is the outermost layer that will line the abdominopelvic cavity, and the visceral layer of the peritoneum is going to be the layer that's the innermost, and it's going to actually contact the organs themselves. We saw with the pericardium that we have this double-layered serous membrane that will wrap around one individual structure. With the peritoneum specifically, we are going to have two different layers, a parietal and a visceral layer, but there's just going to be more things that are suspended in the peritoneum. So this produces a couple other structures in the peritoneum that will not be found in the pleura and the pericardium. The two structures that I'm alluding to are the greater omentum and mesenteries. The greater omentum is a fold of the visceral peritoneum that's looping down from the transverse colon. This greater omentum will often have adipose tissue building up on it, which is often the cause of the characteristic beer belly. As the visceral peritoneum is suspending many different things inside of the peritoneum, it's eventually going to fold back on itself here and form that greater omentum. The other unique structure that's formed only in the peritoneum are known as mesenteries. Mesenteries are also double layers of the visceral peritoneum. And in fact, the mesenteries will project out to the small and large intestines and eventually form the serosa that wraps around the outside. We'll remember from the last slide that the serosa is the outermost layer of the tunics of the GI tract. Mesenteries will specifically suspend the small intestine and the large intestine. And we can see over here that the transverse colon is actually suspended and supplied by the mesenteries shown right here. The small intestine specifically will be suspended by the mesenteries, and the mesenteries will contain many blood and lymphatic vessels that supply the small intestines with blood and also carry nutrients back from the small intestines after absorption has taken place. Despite how apparently complex the peritoneum may look on this slide, we must remember that this is still just a serous membrane. Serous membranes have a parietal layer and a visceral layer, and this serous membrane in particular is just going to suspend more than one thing. Because more than one thing are suspended, that gives rise to these other structures known as mesenteries and the greater omentum. The visceral layer of peritoneum will form the fourth layer of our GI tract, the serosa, and supply blood vessels, nerves, and lymphatic vessels to some of the organs of digestion.